Want to watch my husband make a workbench top? Let's go check it out.
So for this project, we put together a workbench top. This workbench top is following one of the YouTube guides from Rex Kruger. The link to his video will be in the description. His video is based off of a style of sitting workbench that was in the book Ingenious Mechanics by Chris Schwartz. I chose to make this workbench because until I have an actual workshop and workspace, it will be really easy to just put this up against the wall, store it away, and then put it on buckets whenever I need a decent enough workbench. The big advantage of this workbench is that you get to sit. You don't have to stand up when you do stuff. So that's nice. So this first step that I took was putting the boards together with a clamp on each side, aligning the boards so that they're in line on one side, and then checking the gaps between the boards to see if there are any large gaps that won't be able to be clamped together. So once I found a gap, I made a line on each side of the gap and drew an arrow toward the direction that the board is bending, basically away from the gap. I then took the boards apart after drawing a triangle on them to keep them together in the right order when I put them back. And then I went ahead and decided to plane down the bowed parts of the boards. This was my first major woodworking project. It was my first woodworking project that I actually will use, not like practicing a dovetail with my new chisels and stuff like that. I had a lot of fun doing it. I'm really looking forward to doing more projects using this workbench. I like the idea of this workbench because it's smaller, so just kind of building my way up from the ground up on a budget. There are a couple modifications that Rex Kruger has in a series of videos that do more things to this workbench to make it usable. There's like a little makeshift vise where you put your piece of work in there and put a wedge in, and it basically is a fairly good vise. And then there's other kind of holding apparatuses that get attached to it. So once I planed down the bent parts of the boards that had gaps, I put them back together in the right order because I followed that triangle that I drew earlier. And then I lined them up, clamped them back together, double check that I actually got all of the gaps taken care of. And in this case, I got them most of the way. This was by no means a perfect construction, but I'm happy with it. And that's really what matters when you're doing these sorts of projects. You know, if you're happy with it, that's what matters. So you can see here that there's definitely a disadvantage to working outside. I struggled a bit with the wind. It blew around anything that wasn't really nailed down or heavy. Before gluing all of the boards together, I shortened them all down to 85 inches. This was the length that Rex Kruger's tip sheet had, so I just went with it. I thought that I would have big enough cutoffs to make feet. Ended up having fairly short cutoffs since they were 8-foot boards, and then I decided to just go with it and say, how about no feet? And the bench stores way better that way. And I can just put the workbench top on buckets, and it's quite sturdy for my needs at this point. I've found that it helps me saw quite square on a board when I do the Paul Sellers technique, where you start by guiding the saw with your fingers, and then I saw a line across the top of the board, and then I can drop my hand that creates a perpendicular gouge that I can then follow. And I am now going to move on to the next step of actually gluing them together. So when I glue up the boards, I found that in the environment that I'm in, the wood glue dried really, really fast. And you'll see when I'm gluing the boards together, I squeeze the glue on and then I spread it out with an old credit card. That really helps keep it even. I find that it helps keep the glue pretty even, so you don't have to worry about that. So this workbench is not one solid piece of wood. It'll be laminated, which means to take multiple boards and glue them together. This allows making a larger piece of wood with many smaller pieces of wood, and that way you don't have to find a giant piece of wood to turn into your bench. You can just use more common sizes of wood to create a larger surface. So when I went to glue up the boards, I put wood glue on one too many. You're supposed to put wood glue on all but one board for the first half of laminating this. I put glue on all 4 of the boards that I was going to laminate together, so I had glue on a side that wasn't going to get put on a board yet. So I had to take one of the 8-foot boards and add it onto these 4 and then saw it off. When clamping them down, I used the cutoffs. This was more advice from Rex Kruger. I used the cutoffs to provide even pressure for clamping, so I didn't dent the sides of the boards that I'm actually gluing together. These cutoffs can get kind of beat up, and there's really no problem with that. I decided to glue up the second round of boards using the ground as a far more stable surface than a piece of plywood on 2 buckets. It just felt far more advantageous to just do it on the ground. It was way easier. If I were to do this again, which I won't, I would definitely do it on the ground the whole time. I'm really excited because one of my rewards that I've set for myself is once I build a piece of functional furniture, I get to go buy a miter box from the local antique store. I honestly really just want to make a bench that can store shoes that we can just put inside the front door. That'd be really cool. There's also a bedside table, which would be really neat. The reason for laminating in basically 3 stages is the environment that we are in is very dry and very windy, so I found the wood glue dried by the time I finished applying it to a single board. Like the outside of the wood glue had already started to dry, and it was really hard to spread, and I was just concerned that it would not actually glue things together. The reason that I did not evenly space the clamps here is because I didn't evenly space them. I was kind of rushing, I guess, because I wanted to make sure that I got them put together and glued up. By the time that I noticed that they weren't evenly spaced, I figured it was fine. So here you will see me measuring out 4 3/4 inches. I forget what I did. Measuring out a little over 4 inches to saw out a piece from the 5th board in, the middle board, since there's 9, the piece that I sawed out. I'll put that in with a wedge, and then it'll be in that hole nice and firm so that I can use it as a planing stop. According to the way Rex Kruger did it, he did it prior, and that's why I was going to do 4 and then 5. But I messed up and had to do the 5th on there, so I just had to make shift with this. It was actually really fun because I got to saw out the hole and then just pop it out with one of my chisels, which was really cool. And then I evened it up with the chisel a little bit. Made it a little smoother, which in retrospect I probably didn't have to do, and may have actually been a better choice so that the peg would get stuck in there easier, because now I have to use a wedge. Whereas if I hadn't cleaned it up, I may not have had to use a wedge. I do have a hard time stopping in the middle of projects or tasks. I think it's already putting me in a place where I'm getting used to being able to pause, and I'm looking forward to having projects that maybe span a couple weeks. With both sides laminated, I went ahead and popped the workbench right on there, and really, really nice and sturdy. I'm really happy with it. You can see me here playing with my plane. And then also playing with the planing stop peg idea that I was talking about earlier. Works really, really well. The only problem is you can see how it kind of goes from side to side. I got to figure out how to prevent that. I think there's just maybe a couple adjustments that can be made. I don't know. Yeah. Experience, things like that. This was my first time actually having a stable surface to plane on. It wasn't me just clamping a piece of wood to a support beam and trying to plane that.